Welcome to Good Life. I'm Dean Wilson. So glad you've joined us. You can always find us at goodlifetelevision.org. We're all over the social media sites, and we always post the long form interviews as well as power clips. Some of the kind of the great moments from those interviews are all at goodlifetelevision.org. So we'd love you to check them out. We have great people, all walks of life, famous, not famous, overcomers, entrepreneurs, public servants, just great stories. And that's what we're about at Good Life. It's about the good stuff, not always the easy stuff, but the good stuff. And so that's what we're actually talking about in today's program. I have Paige and Mike Guzman with me. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks
for having us.
Yeah, with the Guzmans are in Nashville, Tennessee, and they're college sweethearts. They settled in Nashville. They met at Moody Bible Institute, graduated with plans to pursue vocational ministry, and then they went through some stuff, like we all do. But I was telling them before we came on, I really admire what they've walked through here, and you know, we're never done, but have come through, I should say, and by the grace of God. So I'd just love to hear your guys' story, kind of talk about where you started, where you grew up, and how you met, and then we can get into the rest.
Sure. So I'm a Nashville native. It's kind of a unicorn. A lot of people from Nashville come here, but I was born and raised in the church. My mom says that I came out of the womb loving him, and just had sanctification process, just constantly learning more about the Lord and loving him. I went to Moody Bible Institute to pursue youth ministry. I love teenage girls and just partnering with them in life. I met my husband. Do you want to tell why you went to Moody?
Yeah, I'm Michigan born and raised. Grew up in Detroit, then moved to the suburbs. Had a rough childhood, but overcame a lot. And then I wanted to go to Moody to do just ministry, just to learn how to teach the Word of God. Met my wife there, and I wasn't born and raised in the church, so church culture was still really new to me. So I got a crash course into that going to Bible college. So we got married in 2011, and we lived in Washington State in Spokane, beautiful state.
Moody had a campus out there.
Okay.
So that's where we lived, and we got married. A couple of years into marriage, we got pregnant with our first kid. And about that time, we decided to move back to Nashville to be closer to family.
Yeah. And so we moved out there, out to here, and it's been 7 years because our daughter just turned 7
Sunday.
So literally, it's been just under 7 years for us. So.
And now you have 4.
We do have 4.
Good grief. Under 7?
You have 5.
So we have 5, but mine are older. You're in the thick of it. Is it they're all under 7 years old?
They're also under 7.
Oh my gosh! Wow.
7, 5, 2, and 6 months.
Oh my gosh.
Two very tired parents.
Yeah. Well, treasures in heaven. Just remember that.
Oh my gosh. It's the best thing we've ever done. Our kids are the loves of our lives. It's the best.
That's awesome. That's great. I want to talk about your podcast a little bit, but I want to talk about kind of what you've been through. And I know that, like we talk about on this program, everybody has a story. Life includes suffering. Life includes difficulty. That's just part of being on planet Earth in this condition that we're in. But I want you guys to just share a little bit about kind of what happened and where you are, kind of what's happened with this story.
So I'll start.
Yeah.
So Mike and I started dating, and that's the time where you kind of get to know each other and talk about just our history. And Mike had been very open from the beginning. He used to be an addict. I didn't know anything about addiction and kind of just thought yay, Christ has redeemed you. It's amazing. So because God does that, God just redeems. he can wipe the slate clean and it's done and over with. But I didn't understand that part of addiction is just relapsing and the stronghold that addiction has in your life. So he was very upfront and honest with me, and I was like, great. I just didn't understand it. I was young and naive. We got married, and I'll let you take it from there.
Yeah, I mean, and I told her the truth. I had dabbled with drugs and alcohol, and I was a big party animal when I was younger. You know,
it was typically pills, though.
Yeah. Typically, my drug of choice was prescription medication, and I had dabbled with it, but it was never like super bad, I thought. And then we got married, and it just slowly trickled back in. I did a lot of really big manual labor jobs that were really hard on me. And so I kind of found this excuse to start taking medicine. And then it got more and more and more.
Which is just like sin, you know, like you get an inch and
it takes a mile.
It takes a mile.
Right.
You have to cut it off. To all those listening.
And I did it for a long time. And there were a lot of times where I would get caught by her, like in little ways, you know, like medicine would be missing or something wouldn't add up. And, you know, I told her enough truth to just get by. That way I could be okay with her and still be able to take care of myself. And then we moved out to Nashville, and I didn't know anybody out here. So it was very lonely for me. And I went into a spiral of depression, which caused me to use more drugs and get more access to them. And I mean,
there was a blow up when our daughter was 6 months old, and he had gotten access to drugs, and I told him, like, it's that or us. Like, that was my first understanding of what was happening. And I just said, like, I understand, like, I don't expect you, I've never expected you to be perfect, but you have to choose. He went into Celebrate Recovery. Again, I didn't know much about it. And so I just kind of thought, like, okay, he got the healing that he needed and we're moving on with our life. That was the case.
Yeah. And I mean, I heard what she said. She said it's us or that. And I was like, well, that's an easy answer. I mean, it's you guys. And that's the lie of sin and addiction, is that it doesn't let you know how much hold it has over you.
Right.
You know, because the answer is easy. I choose my family through and through. And then 6 months later, that it gets you, and then it picks back up. And so, things got really bad about a year and a half ago. I was taking all different kinds of medications from different doctors. And I mean, I was really, really depressed. In our podcast, you know, we go through this. Like, there was a moment where I was sitting in a parking lot after work, and I had a gun in my mouth. I was so depressed. I was so downcast, because my entire life at that point had become, how do I get more medicine? How do I hide my medicine addiction from my wife?
And Mike was the only one who knew the truth. So I would have said, even in those moments, like, yeah, we were going through a hard time, but if he had pulled the trigger, I would have been one of those widows who would have said, I would have never seen it coming. Like, yes. And that's a testament to sin's hold in your life and Satan's desire to keep it a secret. And keep you, meaning Mike, in this world of lies that you just can't see the truth. And because Mike was lying all the time, I didn't know. I had no idea the struggles that he was going through. And I would have said we had a great marriage. You can tell we like to have a good time, and we really enjoy each other. And we were still like having a good life, except for Mike was in this internal torment that no one had any idea about. Yeah,
my relationship with the Lord was distraught. My relationship with my wife was based on lies. I mean, it was awful. And I came home and I told her about, you know, like the depression, and I told her about the
He told me suicidal thoughts.
Yeah.
I did not know that he had a gun in his mouth until
we
months
did the podcast
later. We were recording it. I was like,
she was like, I told her, I said in the podcast, you never told me that. And I was like, oh, well,
there it is.
Wow.
And that's part of it. You have so many things that you haven't told people that it just slowly comes out throughout time. And as the person who wasn't the addict, you could have so much grace for that because it's just part of the process.
Yeah. And I was high functioning. I had a job. We went to church. I had friends. I mean,
we're in community.
I consider myself a really good dad. And
that's a downplay. He is the best father I've ever met in my life. So for all of this to happen, we just didn't, I don't know. I was so caught off guard, guys. I was so caught off guard. The precipice, it all came to light after Mike had that time in the car. He came back and told me just enough that I was like, we're just going to get on our knees before the Lord and we are going to put worship on and we're going to open up our Bibles and we're just going to pray and we're going to pray and we're going to ask the Lord to take this away. And we just did. And we spent maybe an hour and a half in our living room right over there, just like on our knees, proclaiming that we are the redeemed and we need God to save us from this. We need him to take this away from us.
And I was terrified because I felt like everything in my life was a lie. So I was terrified to approach the Lord, and we did wholeheartedly. And I mean, and that was before I even got caught with all the drugs.
Right. That was like the tip of the iceberg.
That was this much of the iceberg. And I haven't had a suicidal thought then, even after, we were planning on divorce and she was, going to leave me. And
right. So right after that was in November. And then in March, this was right as March 2020, pandemic happened. And for better or for worse, a character flaw that I have is when life gets hard, I run.
We go on vacation.
Yes. And it's not great. I don't recommend it, but I like to get distracted and go somewhere else. Your problems will always follow you no matter where you go. It's not a great tactic, but everything was shutting down. Flights were really cheap. Our very best friends live in Buffalo, New York, and me and my two oldest kids went to Buffalo, New York. Mike was working, so he couldn't come, but I had a job that I could take with me. So a couple of days later, Mike joins with us. Do you want to take it from there?
Yeah. And just like your problems, they follow you. My addiction followed me there. I found myself not even being there for 6 hours, and I was rifling through their medicine cabinets. And these were dear friends of ours who love us and who have loved us through this. And then, so it shows my depravity that I'm willing to do that.
Right. And I had said before he got there, I said, her name's Amanda. And I said, Amanda, I know she had just started Ritalin. And I said, would you mind please going and putting that away in your bedroom somewhere? Mike has struggled with prescription drugs. And she also has 3 young kids. And to no fault of her own, she forgot.
Yeah.
She forgot. And honestly, it was the Lord's hand in he ordained all of this. And but Mike got into her prescription drugs, and the next morning she came up to me and she's like, Paige, I am so sorry. I forgot to put them away and I forgot to count them, but I'm missing 6.
She was missing some. That's when everything changed.
Right. So I sat Mike down and I said, we've already had this discussion and we've had it several times. In November, we had that discussion of like, I'm done. If this happens again, like we have 3 kids now and this is a life that I'm not subjecting them to. So if this happens again, for our family's sake, we have to leave. So this happened.
I was on the next flight out of Buffalo.
And we separated. He moved into our basement.
Into our unfinished garage.
Yeah, it wasn't a great place.
It wasn't a nice place.
And 5 days later, we found out we were pregnant with number 4. So that was fun.
Yeah.
It was the hardest, most difficult thing to walk through for a multitude of reasons. I was mortified just by the circumstances that it happened. Now looking back, I can see I'm so thankful that it happened that way because it gave me the accountability not to sweep it under the rug, because my best friends were there and we were in their home. And he gave me the accountability to say, no more, I can't do it. We can't do it. So for 4 months, we were separated. I went to a lot of counseling because I don't know how to be separated. I didn't want this. I had spent our entire marriage making sure that this wouldn't have happened. And I had tied our lives so much together, as marriage does, that I didn't know how to untie it. And so I went to counseling, and she gave me really good steps to our circumstance of what does separation look like, and what did you do?
Whew. It was a lot to take in and a lot to apply to life, because I had to move out of my home. You know, I had to not see my kids, and I had to figure out life without her. And the weight of it just constantly daily crushed me. It literally forced me to do something I should have done before, which was seek help and seek out guidance from the Lord and from those around me. And so the first thing I did is I shouted from the mountains. I told everybody I knew.
Right.
Everybody. I met with,
and that's key,
dozens and dozens of friends and family, and you know, and I was trying to actually looking to escape. I was like, okay, well, I can move back to Michigan. I can move back to Michigan. I'll have work there. I'll have a place to stay. I can reestablish myself, you know, and then I have family in Washington, and I can move there and do that. And my family was like, don't you dare leave those kids. Like, you may have lost your marriage, but you're not going to lose your kids. And being around them is the worst decision you can do. And so I stayed and met with our pastor and our elders and our friends, and just
tell me what your dad said on that phone call about integrity.
My dad said, you know, like, you need to start living a life of integrity. And he's like, and integrity is not on a scale from 1 to 10. Like, you can't have you can't be 8, you can't be a 9 on integrity. You either have it or you don't.
Right.
And you're on out, like, you've been living, like, trying to live like a 5 or 6, and he's like, you're a 0 when it comes to integrity. You need to be a 10. You need to have it.
And that wisdom changed.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I had no integrity at that point. I mean, I was living in complete lack of integrity with half truths and stuff. So everybody knew. I started to go to counseling more. I was already going before that. I started telling the truth in counseling. You know, I was telling my counselor this much, you know, like getting, you know, it's like taking an antibiotic, like, well, I'm only gonna take the antibiotic for the 1 day. Thanks, doc. You know, like, I wasn't completing it. And I started getting into Celebrate Recovery and working the steps, and I was done. It was devastating. It was awful.
How did you get back together?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Let's get to the good part.
Yeah.
No,
It was not easy.
It was not easy. And part of that was the list that my counselor and I came up with of what did I need. So the pain that I felt is that I didn't feel safe. I didn't feel like I could trust Mike, obviously, because of what had happened. And so the steps were, I had hoped for reconciliation, but I was not going to tell Mike that at that point when everything happened, because I needed him to feel the weight of how bad this was.
Smart.
So my counselor and I talked about what did I need, and at that point we were about a month into our separation. And what I needed to see from Mike was that he was going to tell me the truth, even when it was hard. Yeah. That he was going to tell me when he was tempted, which he could not tell me and get away with. But I needed to know that even when it was difficult, you were still going to push through and try to have connection with me. I needed Mike to pursue God. Outside of that, nothing matters. It just doesn't. And through him pursuing God, that does bring safety to me, because God can work on everything. I can trust Mike to God. He's first God's son, you know? And little by little, Mike was doing it. I'm really good friends with our associate pastor, and I kept going to lunch with her. And each time she's like, how are you doing? How can I love on you? What's happening? And each time I was like, Mike is literally doing everything that I asked of him. Like I would ask him to come to me with the hard stuff, and he was coming to me. He had to go to Celebrate Recovery. He had to be in a STEP program. He had to be in counseling. He had to have accountability.
Multiple accountability people that I went to. And
yeah. And he was doing all those things, and he was meeting with all those people, and we read a book together. Like there, just everything that I had asked of him, he was meeting and exceeding. And so little by little, I was trusting him again. I like to have a lot of fun. And my small group, we have as a couple small group, and they asked if we wanted to go to a couples trip to Florida. And I was like, yeah, I do. And Mike was like, really? Like, really, do we need to go on a couples trip? But I'm so thankful we did, because that was just the beginning of us again.
Yeah.
And gave us that time of figuring it back out. But by that time, he had been doing it. He'd been doing all the things that I had asked. And so we, little by little, first he was in the guest bedroom. You know, he was out of the basement, but we allowed him in the guest bedroom. And then eventually he made it back into our room and into our lives again. But it was Mike earning back trust.
Quit living out of my hamper, out of my laundry hamper, and quit sleeping in a mattress on a cold floor to the bed with my wife where I should have been.
Yeah. And you're still earning back that trust every day, aren't you?
Every day.
That takes a long time.
It does. And a lot of just opening up and sharing the things that are uncomfortable. And I just have to keep, our counselor says, like, water the things you want to grow. And I keep saying, like, Mike, I don't ever expect you to be perfect. I don't ever expect you not to fall into temptation again. I don't ever expect you to be sober, but I expect you to come to me. Like, I need you, when things get hard, to come to me and come to the Lord.
And she made it a very safe place for me, because I didn't feel safe for a long time. And she made it a very, very safe place. And even now, there are times when she's like, you know, she'll tell me, like, it's things like that make me not able to trust you. And it's like, oh, okay. Like, because we're still working on it. We're still working on our marriage. And it's like, not only do I need to be proactive, so does she, in letting me know what
I need,
what she needs, you know?
Right. I am so happy about this. You know, addiction, you know, it's vicious. Number one, it's insidious, especially pills. You can't smell it. You know, it's not on your breath. You're not staggering drunk. So it's very insidious. But, you know, one of the things about addiction is it makes you cling to the Lord every day.
Yeah.
I mean, you haven't had a pill all day today, have you?
Nope.
Yeah. Thank God. But it's every day.
Yep.
You know, and you're, I mean, I just think that that's the one thing. Number one, I think everybody in the world should go to Celebrate Recovery. That's my opinion. That's a side note, but we all need that. But number two, I mean, addiction, it can cause you, in terms of being connected to the vine, it can cause you to cling, because every day you're clinging. And if you're not clinging, and we're all this way, but I mean, you're this close to just losing everything.
We're all one bad decision away from being that person who's strung out on drugs on the street.
Yes.
And
Yes.
Knowing our own depravity, knowing how sinful we all are, really helps us to have grace and extend love to other people who are struggling. This week, Mike was telling me how the Lord had really showed him something really cool about the crutch. Can you share that?
Oh yeah. So in my recovery, I mean, I've been sober my sober journey's been going on for about 1.5 years now. And I realized that I had been using the Lord as my crutch, not as the feet that I stand on. Like, I had been working my recovery on my own, but using him as support. And when the reality is, like, it's the other way around. Like, if anything, I'm the crutch. I'm the accessory you know, and he is the steps, and he is the foundation, and he's the reliance, you know, that when I feel that temptation come up, it's not a conversation that Mike needs to have with himself. It's the conversation that I need to have with the Lord, and pleading with him.
Right.
Because we are one bad decision away, but we're also one good decision away from keeping the good life that we have.
Yes. Yeah. And life's going to get better every single day.
Yeah. And it's crazy because you're, you know, the good life. One thing she has said to me for so long, even before this thing, is, you know, she goes, "We have a really good life." And I didn't understand what she was saying.
Well, because you were struggling with, like, really all in your own mind, because nobody else knew.
Yeah. But now like on the other side of things, I'm like, man, it really is. Like, we do have a really good life, and I can see it now.
Isn't that, you talked about shouting it from the mountaintops. There's something so powerful about naming this. Hey, let me tell you, everybody, I'm not, you know, I'm not as bad as you say I am. I'm worse. You know, let me tell you the truth. Like, when you can tell the truth, it sets you free. I mean, like, I just think that that's another powerful thing about it. And it needs to be, the church needs to be better at this. Unfortunately, I think AA and Celebrate Recovery have a lot closer representation to the actual church maybe than the actual church, just because it's okay to not be okay. It's okay to shout it from the mountaintops. I am totally addicted to these pills. Totally. Help me, you know, let me, and to be able to say that out loud, it's like the beginning of the freedom and the grace and the life and that you guys are tasting. But I mean, can you imagine where you're going to be in 5 years and 10 years? I can tell you, Mike, you're going to help thousands of people. I just believe that, because there are so many people today dying in a pile, totally bound up, spiraling down with no answer. When you can tell them, let me tell you where I've been, let me tell you what God did for me. I'm getting chills, by the way. When you can say that, and it's the truth about your own, you talk about ministry. This is not like what you learned at Moody Bible Institute anymore. This is real. Like, you guys are living it.
Absolutely.
And Paige, let me say something to you. I'm not trying to preach, but I am.
I love it.
My show. It's my show. I can preach if I want to. Paige, you were forced to make really hard decisions. The thing about the partner in this situation is you're put in this unbelievably horrible position where you have to make a tough decision. You're forced to. You made it. You did that in faith with great courage. So I want to just applaud you. And speaking of ministry, I mean, there are thousands of people in your position that are having to deal. What in the world do I do? Addiction's the most confusing thing on the planet. It's like I said, it's insidious, it's unseen, it's just horrible. And there are so many people in your shoes that can't make that hard decision, or don't trust God enough to be able to say, buddy, you're out. You're out. I love you. You're out. Like, to
say that you're out. Yeah.
What's that?
Like, I love Mike enough to say you're out.
Yes. That is so brave.
And
that is so brave.
She's the hero in this story.
No, not Christ is the hero in this story. And
well, you're kind of a hero too. Thank you, Mike. I agree with Mike. Well, I just want to bless you guys, because we didn't even talk about your podcast. The podcast is Laugh So You Don't Cry, which I think is genius. I can see the joy in you guys. So I'm going to listen to your podcast, because I need to laugh. I like laughing.
Yes, we try to tell our story in a funny way, because we just have to have love and laughter with it. But Mike Got Caught 1 and 2 are the episodes that deal with just the story, the elongated version of this. And then the rest are just funny stories from our life and trusting God and what the Lord has taught us.
Yes, and you're going to have a million stories with those 4 kids. And then as this, you're going to get stronger, Mike, every week and month and year. If you cling every day, you're going to get, and life is going to get better every day. And I can't wait to follow your story. But I think your ministry is probably, in my opinion, going to explode, because I know there are thousands of people in both of your shoes that they need hope, they need God, they need help, they need truth. And they need somebody, and when you're somebody who's been there, you have great opportunities. So bless you.
Thank you, Dean.
Thanks for coming on. We'll see you next time. Welcome to Good Life. I'm Dean Wilson. Great program today. Geoff Green is with me. He's the Chief Executive Officer at the Santa Barbara City College Foundation. He's also a nonprofit expert. He's a great guy. We had a great time. You're going to enjoy it. Geoff Green, The Good Life is next. Welcome to Good Life. I'm Dean Wilson. So glad you've joined us. You can always find us at goodlifetelevision.org, where you can see all the interviews, as well as what we call power clips, which are kind of special moments from all those interviews. There's some great people. Over the last year, we've had a lot of wonderful guests. We've learned a lot, from entrepreneurs to young people, public servants, athletes. We've had a little bit of everything. So it's been a lot of fun. We hope you'll join us at goodlifetelevision.org. And I'm so glad to have my guest here today. Geoff Green is with me. Geoff, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for the invitation.
Geoff is the CEO at the Santa Barbara City College Foundation, which is here obviously in Santa Barbara where we are. And Geoff's had a very interesting kind of journey in business, specifically the nonprofit world, that I'm excited to unpack. But first of all, just tell me, you grew up in the San Francisco area. Tell me a little bit about your growing up and your family.
Certainly. So I was born and raised in the San Francisco Bay Area. My mom was a 6th grade teacher. Actually, a whole lot of folks in my family are teachers.
Oh, really?
To this day. My dad was a juvenile probation officer. So the joke was I got away with nothing, which was only kind of a joke. But I grew up there, went to school there through the public school system, and then came down to Santa Barbara in 1990 to go to UCSB. So that's what brought me to town. And my full intention and assumption was that this was just for college, and I'd head either back north or elsewhere. And some 30 years later, here I am.
Here you are.
So.
Well, and after college, you had a dream to go to Yosemite,
Yes.
And be a park ranger.
Yeah, that was my dream job from the time I can remember. My parents went there, my grandparents before them, I'm sure even before them. That was sort of a family camping tradition, and I have a photo, I think, of when I was 6 months old standing in front of Yosemite Falls.
Really?
So that was something I loved to do. I thought it was a way to combine all the different things I loved, and I thought, well, if I could be a park ranger, that would be perfect. And sure enough, I had the opportunity to do that at first as an intern. Actually, there was an intern program organized through the universities, and then as a full-time ranger naturalist for a few years, and I did that until 1997.
Yeah, and then you came to join the Fund for Santa Barbara. Is that right?
Yep. Yeah, that's what brought me back.
And talk about that season in your life and your career.
Yeah, well, I was, I'm a proud generalist. It's interesting that I work alongside academic specialists because I'm the opposite of that. And I, in a earlier time, it probably would have been called a Renaissance person, but these days it's just considered unfocused. So,
Renaissance is better.
I like Renaissance better. But yeah, I really wanted to do. I love the educating, public speaking, connecting with people. And I had done a lot of different things through my college time too. I gotten very involved in student politics, running for office and sitting on the student senate and associated student president, and those sorts of things. I did a lot of volunteer work. I got really interested in solving homelessness and housing issues. A lot of environmental work was really interesting to me. I'd done a radio show for a while on our KCSB public radio station there. So it was just sort of a little bit of everything, and when I was trying to figure out, I ultimately decided that coming back to Santa Barbara was what I wanted to do. But the question was how, and what would I possibly do, and who pay me to do it.
Right.
So the Fund for Santa Barbara ended up being the place, and it was largely because the link between all the things I was really passionate about were what you might broadly call sort of social justice issues, and I wanted to figure out how to solve some of those big problems.
Right.
And the fund was a hub for that, and they really were a spot for supporting innovative grassroots, in many cases experiments in the nonprofit sector. And so that's what that was before cell phones, and I remember I had to fax my resume. And
right.
If you remember faxes,
I do.
And then have a phone interview, and then drive down here, and then drive back, and
wow.
but that's what brought me back.
I want to talk about the Santa Barbara City College Foundation that you lead, and kind of maybe start with kind of your vision for that foundation, and specifically the SBCC Promise part of this.
Sure.
Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't have any experience with community college personally. Well, actually, I say that that's not true. I had two things that only later occurred to me. One is that I had taught a course through adult education on homelessness and housing policy with a co-teacher who was a faculty member at UCSB, and I think that was in around the year 2000. And then I'd also taken Spanish classes. And so I had a little bit of experience. But when the one program I really knew well when I started in 2015 with the SBCC Foundation was called Transitions. And it's only because we funded it as the Fund for Santa Barbara. And this is for men and women who are incarcerated who want to come back straight into college. And so they do prep and enrollment while they're incarcerated so that they can come back and enroll immediately afterward. And so I was aware of that program. I thought it was fantastic. It was one of the earlier ones in the nation. It's not that uncommon these days, but that was one of the earlier. And so I ultimately found the link between the things I loved and this role. But it was a strange way to enter. I mean, it was sort of a back and forth with the board at the time about, was this what did they want to do, and did I want to be the guy to do it, and
right.
could we work together in these ways? So once we got there and I got excited about this role, I had a lead time of a few months. And during that, President Obama at the time and Governor Bill Haslam, so the Democratic president, Republican governor of Tennessee, which in itself was remarkable. There's very little bipartisanship happening. Right. And they did a joint press conference on a thing called the Tennessee Promise. And that was the first time I ever heard the term. And it caught my ear, and I listened to what they were promoting. And it wasn't long before I started to hear more and more about that and really dive into that notion. And there's another funny side note, Tom Hanks, who I don't have to explain who Tom Hanks is. Tom Hanks, when I was growing up as a kid, he'd gone to Chabot College, which was the community college nearest where I grew up in the East Bay Area, in Hayward there.
Okay.
And basically, in my region, you had to know three things growing up. You had to know reading, writing, and Tom Hanks went to Chabot. That's what you had to know. Because this is the era where Big and all the big films come up. So he wrote a couple of pieces, actually, one in particular that got circulated widely about the value of community colleges. And so that was kind of an exciting junction for me between that reality, my memories of being a kid and knowing that he was a community college graduate, and then all of the things that were starting to happen around College Promise. So it was early in my time. I started in February 2015, and within the first few months, every conference I went to, there was some conversation about College Promise. And the basic notion is that the idea of universal public education for up to high school was actually a fairly controversial debate 100 years ago in this country. Does everybody need it? Why should people go to high school if they can run the family business, the family farm, if they can read and write? And of course, today you push that another 4 years further, and it's for many people, high school isn't enough for whatever they may want to do. And community college now is the question, I think, at hand. And I think it is the best possible tool for advancement, whether it be personal, personally pursuing your own dreams and building your own skill set, or families being healthy and having the income they need, or socioeconomic advancement. And frankly, anything. So the idea is, can we as a society pay for every young person who wants to go to community college for 2 years?
Wow.
And that's the beginning of the idea.
And where does that go for you? I mean, how are you pursuing that vision?
Well, I ran into, as I said early on, that was something that was talked about at every conference, every conversation. And of course, I was brand new, learning my role. Not new to philanthropy or the community, but certainly new to the community college part of it. and discovered that there were 3 predecessors in our state. So in California, which has the largest community college system, largest higher ed system in the Western world, 116 campuses and colleges now, 72 districts, over 2 million students. A quarter of all community college students in the United States go to a California community college. And there were 3 in California that had started experiments with what they called the Promise. And the first was actually our neighbor Ventura College. And the second was Long Beach. And the third, which had just happened, was at Cuesta College, our other neighbor to the north. Well, just jumping over Hancock to the north. And so I started to get to know what they were doing, why they were doing it, how they were doing it, and hearing about that model, and then looking for something that would solve a bigger issue. And as I said, that was my big passion really, is how do you structurally deal with some of the challenges we have in our community? I mean, scholarships are wonderful, but they don't solve the bigger structural problem. They help that one student. And so this was, to me, an idea of how do you solve the bigger structural problem of affordability and access to college. And so we started asking around, and what we found was that there was a pretty good consensus of what would work and how to do it right, how to do it well, but nobody to that point had done it because it was a very expensive proposition, especially for community colleges, since our philanthropic infrastructure is really nascent. I mean, if you think about the 4-year institutions, the Ivy Leagues, they figured this out 200 years ago.
Right.
I mean, it's a core part of the institution. If you look at the 4-year public universities, it was really the 80s and 90s where they started to build their infrastructure for fundraising and development. And for us, it feels like last Tuesday. You know, we just figured this out, and we're still figuring it out. But the value of being at Santa Barbara City College is that we have one of the largest and one of the oldest foundations in the nation, actually, for community colleges. And so the idea of raising $2 to $3 million a year for a program like this was not unthinkable. And so that's really how we started. We started to build it that way. We leaned on the research and the experiments that had been done by our colleagues before us, so that we didn't have to repeat those painful mistakes ourselves.
Right. Wow.
And that's what we launched in 2015.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
This is obviously an interesting environment. Seems like it's getting more interesting by the day here in the year 2020. But
yeah,
reading your information here. I mean, you're clearly a nonprofit expert or a fundraising professional. You've been on all these councils and boards. And what is your council? I know there seems like there's kind of a buzzword in the nonprofit world in recent years: sustainability.
Yep.
And I know you do a lot of consulting and things like that. How do you advise nonprofits toward a path that is sustainable?
That's a great question. And yes, that is one of the key issues for nonprofit organizations. I think the first thing, I mean, clarity of mission is always first. So you got to know what you're doing, why you're doing it. I'm a form follows function kind of guy, so I don't have any religion about a particular model being the best, but I do believe that you have to be clear on what you're doing, and then you build the structure that supports that thing, whatever it is. And for nonprofits, it's revenue strategy above all, because that's the thing that you have to figure out once you've got your mission clear.
Right.
How do you sustain it? How do you make it happen? And almost as a rule, the more diverse the income stream, the better. So you want to help people figure out what are all the different ways that you can earn those dollars. And the primary reason for that, and this is true in for-profit business as well, is that the most sustainable, the most resilient income stream is the one that's the most diverse. And that's because if one of them goes sideways, it doesn't sink you. So you can lose all of your grant funding, or you can lose all of your earned income, or you can lose all of your major donor base for a short time and be okay, as long as that was only just a piece of it. But for those nonprofits that are dependent on 1 or 2 grant makers, or a handful of donors, or a very specific single income source that's an earned revenue source, that's the most dangerous, because something's going to happen at some point that's going to endanger that. And once that does happen, you got to be ready with a backup plan. So that's a big part of it. The other piece is the board structures, and I'm a kind of a board junkie, if you will.
Are you?
I like boards. I actually like working with boards.
That's so wonderful.
And I sit on boards, and I help other people do that. And it's because it's one of those volunteer jobs where there's only one reason to be there, and that is that you got to be passionate about that mission. You got to love doing it, because that's the reward. You're in the nonprofit sector, you're not getting paid to be on a board. It is a lot of time if you do want to do it well, and you have to be an evangelist for the cause, whatever it may be, out in the community. So I think that having the right board, having the right overall structure, and the income revenue structure is the key once you've got the mission clear.
That's great.
So,
and do you like advise boards? Is
Yeah.
that part of what you do?
yeah, I do. I mean, so the fund, it was interesting for me that the fund, I kind of parlayed my love of teaching, and at least my version of it, alongside my passion for the nonprofit sector. And then at the fund, we had a technical assistance program, still very much there and thriving. And that's just a jargony term for everything but the check. So what other support can you offer? And so it was access to resources and teaching and models and all that. And so I started to do a lot of that and just kind of share what I had seen that worked, or what I'd learned, or what I knew from experience. And that kind of built and built and built. And that's ultimately what made me I guess a consultant. I'll put that in finger quotes.
Well, no, I mean, if you're an expert, you're an expert.
Yeah, but I do love it, and that's where it started. So I do. I don't do as much as I once did, because the work with the foundation is absolutely a full-time job.
Yeah.
But I do. I mean, there's a lot of partnerships there. You know, the lines are, in my opinion, very very gray between what our work is and what these other partners' work might be. So we work with a lot of folks, and some of that is helping and coaching and mentoring boards.
I think that's really valuable.
Yeah.
I mean, we have a great board, and I'm so thankful if they're watching.
Yeah, I saw that. They're watching.
They might be watching. They are great. But I was, as I've worked with our board, I've realized what you just said, which is the only reason you're there is for love. You know, I mean, this is going to be. There is. I mean, there's not a lot of there's not a lot of fanfare, not a lot of.
Right.
You know, benefit to this. There's no personal benefit. I mean, it is purely a service thing, and it can be a lot of work.
Yeah.
And these are the people that have the fiduciary responsibility for this.
That's
it's
right.
not the staff.
That's right.
You know, they have all the responsibility on their shoulders, and yet they're unpaid total volunteers.
Yeah.
So that's a tricky.
It is.
thing.
It's where the buck stops, and there is a lot of debate, you know, theoretical and wonky nonprofit circles about, you know, does that model still work, and what is that? And the place I've always started, and usually when I'm doing a training for a new board or a younger board, it's to kind of frame it in the legal framework in which a board exists. And really, it's the tax status. So and you know, we can talk about business in a moment here, but I'm fond of saying that 501c3 is a tax status, not a business model. You know, because nonprofits are businesses in every way.
Yeah, I don't think they should be called nonprofits myself.
I know.
I think they should be called tax-exempt organizations.
Well, yeah, I mean, how many organizations define themselves by what they're not? I mean, you don't say I'm a...
Yeah, right, exactly. And if you're a nonprofit, you're not going to be in business.
That's right. That's right. So I'm with you. Let's start that. We'll start that campaign.
Let's do it.
I need something else to do. Let's do that. Well, I think there's some really good points there, and the way that the nonprofit sector was, the trade that we make in the nonprofit sector is that by making the case that our mission is in itself of value. I mean, the idea of taxation is that you're taxed on your commerce or your income or all the things we're taxed on because we have to pay into the common good. So whatever that common good that we all want to share the cost of. And nonprofits make the case that they are the common good, that they're basically what they do is as valuable as any tax they might pay. And so they're excused from some of their taxes. Not all, and people forget that. I mean, we're tax-paying organizations. We pay payroll tax and a lot of the larger taxes. But the idea is they do that, and then in turn, the community, and in this case, the people of the state of California, because nonprofits are incorporated by state just like for-profits are, have the obligation and opportunity to basically make sure that they're making good on their mission. And that's really what the board is supposed to be, is the representatives of the people of the state to govern and make sure that the nonprofit is doing what it says.
Right.
And so it is an unusual dynamic, especially when you have a long time or a founding executive director. Nobody's ever going to know more about that work than that person, and yet they report to and ultimately are governed by a board of directors of volunteers.
Right.
So yeah, it's a funny dance.
It
to
is.
be sure.
No, that's for sure. You've had an interest in homelessness.
Yes.
And I know you've been involved in the efforts here locally for a long time. Talk about kind of that interest and also the progress we've made and kind of where you see it going from here.
Yeah, so I'll be very clear. I think housing is a human right. I think we all deserve safe shelter of some kind, and it is, and for most people, fortunately, they do that through their ability to earn an income and pay for housing on the open market. But for others who can't, for any number of reasons, I think one of the things that we're called to do as a community, as a society, is figure out, okay, so then what? I have been really interested in that because it's the most expensive piece of our living arrangement for everybody. I mean, housing usually is the biggest piece of what you pay for.
Right.
And so there's no easy solution because you can't just do it in a quick way. And of course, emergency shelter beds are critical, but they don't solve the bigger problem. So how do you put that system together? So someone who's on the street has a place to go on a cold night, which people can identify with generally. The soup kitchen model, the shelter bed model. But then ultimately, where do they go from there? What do you need to get there? And I think there's been a lot of really smart, good experiments, and there are there's thousands of people committed to this work. But it's telling that we've not solved it.
Right.
So 10 years, well, I shouldn't say 10 years ago. I think it was now 12 to 13 years ago. There was a 10-year plan to end chronic homelessness. And this was a wave of things that came out. The Bush administration had a program at a national level that had pushed this notion of a 10-year plan to end chronic homelessness. And so a lot of communities signed on to that. There was federal funding for it. And our community was one of them. And I was part of this group of, I think, 40 people that crafted this plan. And if you read the plan today, it's a smart plan. It still holds up. But the fact is we didn't do it. And the reason is we didn't commit the necessary resources. And that happens time and time again, place after place. There's a moment where people's eyes are on the issue, and then it drifts. And so I think political will and philanthropic consistency are the two biggest challenges.
So money was the problem.
I think money and political focus. I mean, it's not a sexy issue. It's a hard one to deal with, especially if you see it up close. So there's those moments where you hear about something, and then of course there's the flip side of the issue, which is where people don't want someone who's been living on the streets for a month on their front doorstep. They feel like this is an invasion of my space or my property or my privacy, or just it's an unpleasant reminder of the reality of what our community really is made up of. And so so we have to balance the notion of making sure that our public spaces are clean and safe, but with offering real shelter. Because you don't just, if you move people on, you don't solve the problem. And we've seen that time and time again. People have been shooed away from places, and in some cases legitimately so. I'm not suggesting folks should just say, oh, okay, well, there's nowhere to sleep, so you might as well sleep here. But we have to remember that the homelessness epidemic is tied with a mental health crisis.
Right.
It's tied with our wealth inequality. It's tied and income inequality, which of course we know has been growing. And it's tied with a whole range of other things that, frankly, it's really costly to do it the way we do it now. And there were some stories, it was probably 5-6 years ago, $1 Million Murray and these sort of headlines that caught everybody's eye that said that, if you actually calculate the cost of caring for someone who has no shelter, their time in and out of jail, their time in and out of rehab, their time in and out of hospitals and emergency rooms, it is a really expensive way to live. And so what they made the economic argument. So even if the moral imperative or the social imperative or anything else wasn't enough, you could make that economic argument that it's actually cheaper to just house everybody. And the sort of housing first model was
I was just going to ask you about that.
Yeah.
The housing first model kind of became a thing.
Yeah.
I've seen that in the apartment complex we had in Dallas, where we had we had 488 units in one complex. Everything's big in Texas.
Yep.
488 units. 70 of them, or somewhere around 70 of them, were a permanent supportive housing for chronically homeless. They had to be chronically homeless with a disability, which could be alcoholism, could be. But if you had those two things and you submitted to the program, which included testing, you had a caseworker, it was permanent.
Yeah.
And I thought it worked well.
That's brilliant.
It was now unfortunately there's not a lot of complexes, like we were kind of out in the middle of nowhere. But I saw the housing part where you put a roof over somebody's head, and we'd have a bed for them and a couch, and that then it gave you a shot at answering some of the other.
Exactly.
It gave you a shot at the mental health. I mean, have you seen it? I mean, I'm sure you've seen it work.
Yeah, well, that's exactly the model, and I don't think there's any question left about is that the right way. It is the only way that's worked at a large scale, which is you can deliver services endlessly, but if someone doesn't have a stable roof and a home and a bed, you're never going to get past that first step. But if you can first house somebody and then deliver whatever supports they need on site, and it's just not that expensive compared to the cost of keeping someone homeless.
Right.
So in our community, I mean, you asked about here, I will say we have one of the best run, and I just retired. I'm kind of biased. I just retired from another volunteer job. But I spent 12 years on the commission for the Housing Authority for the city of Santa Barbara.
Okay.
In fact, my last meeting was just last week.
Oh, really?
And I have so much respect for that crew. I mean, it's led right now by Rob Fredericks and his team, and they do it right. They just do it right, and they've done it for over 50 years. So we have a great model of how it can work. We also have an incredible nonprofit group. I mean, you have Transition House for families experience homelessness. You have the Rescue Mission. You have PATH, which is formerly the Cacique Shelter, formerly Casa Esperanza. And so each of them do a piece of the puzzle. The problem, again, is scale, and we don't have enough beds, and we don't have enough infrastructure to do it for everyone that needs it. And so that's really the question on the table. You may have seen Los Angeles a couple years ago passed a pair of measures that actually funded homeless services at a remarkable level. But you can see today, even that the money alone doesn't solve the problem. So it's huge, it's complex, I think it's critical, and to this day, it was one of the first issues I got involved with. But I would say if I had to pick what's the most critical, that would be in the top two. Top three, maybe. Yeah.
You do a lot. So I was reading. It took me a while, but what drives you? I mean, I honestly, I don't know if I've read about somebody your age who's kind of done this much, and a lot of it's volunteer leadership. And what gets you up in the morning? I mean, why do you do all this?
That's a fair question. I think. And I don't mean this to sound trite, but I grew up. I never worried about all these things that I work on. I grew up. I have a wonderful family. Didn't worry about have a roof over my head, food. Had great schools. I feel like what's the saying, to those to whom much is given, much is expected.
Right.
I mean, it's that notion of paying it forward, or however you phrase that. And I enjoy it because I like personally. What I get out of it is the experience of seeing something work. So I like the challenge of seeing a problem and trying to fix it in some manner or figure out a solution, either something that hasn't been tried before or something that's only been tried at a small scale, and can you do it bigger? And I think that's a very human thing. I think there's a lot of us get satisfaction out of doing good, fixing a problem. And I tend to be a glass half full person on virtually everything. Including philanthropy, and maybe that's why I ended up accidentally doing the fundraising side of the work. And most fundraisers are accidental. In case you haven't heard us say that before, very few 5-year-olds say, "I want to be a fundraiser when I grow up." But I do think that that's a part of it. Is that it become once you learn that that's the tool for all of this. Money is just the tool. That's what it's for.
Right.
And if you can fundraise, there's a lot of people out there with plenty. And that's one of the interesting things of and really one of the tragedies of our moment is that there are so many people with so much at the same time that there's more and more people with so little and not enough. And so bridging that, philanthropy isn't the solution in itself. There's a lot of things that go into how do you make that more equal so that everyone has a fair shot. But it can be a starter, and philanthropy can be the venture capital, if you will, to try something out in the nonprofit side. That otherwise might not have happened. And I love the sector because it's, this is probably not entirely fair to say this, but if government, you can't get the political will. So to do something through a governmental structure of any level, federal, local, you name it, you have to have the political will. If you can't build the political will, it's a non-starter. To do it in the for-profit sector, you have to have a profit model. So you have to be making money somehow. And if there's a problem that needs to be solved, but you can't figure out how to make money from it, it's a non-starter. So in between those two spaces is where the nonprofit sector lives, and it sort of draws from both. So you build political will among enough people that want to give, and institutions, and you build a model where you can generate enough revenue to get it going, and that's where the nonprofit sector lives.
And if you can do it in a sustainable way, you can make a big difference.
You can build on it. And if we think about the successful institutions in our community, most of them started as fairly radical nonprofit notions. I mean, they were this little idea that probably a whole lot of people said, I don't think that's going to work, Bob. But here we are. So so that's the satisfaction in it.
That's fantastic. Well, we're out of time already.
Yeah.
Geoff Green for president. Geoff Green for president.
That's not a job I'm seeking, but thank you.
Yeah, congratulations. Thanks for what you've done for the community. Seriously.
Thank you. Thank you. This has been a lot of fun.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
appreciate it. And we'll see you next time.